I remember the moment that little girl, barely 8 years old and hobbling on a pair of metal crutches, made her way through that packed diner. She limped past table after table, and every single one of them turned her away without a word. By the time she finally reached my booth, her voice was so soft it barely rose above the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation. "Can I sit here?" she asked me. Everyone else said no. I didn't know it then, but the next minute, just 60 seconds, would open a door to something dark and twisted hiding right under this town's nose. And it would shake everything and everyone to the core. This is the story of me and that little girl, Lyra. And trust me, it doesn't end the way you're expecting. But before I dive into it, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. All right, let's get into it. The Rusty Spoon Diner sat at the corner of 5th and Marshall, same place it had been for 4 decades. Inside, the chrome counters shone like they'd been polished by hand every morning. The old red booths had patches sewn into them, but they were still comfortable, and the coffee tasted like somebody's grandmother made it with love, and maybe a little cinnamon thrown in. It was the kind of spot where everybody knew everybody else. The waitresses called you honey, whether you were 8 or 80. Saturday afternoons meant packed booths and the steady, gentle rumble of small-town gossip drifting around like warm air from a heater. Laughter bounced off the walls. Forks clinked against plates. The jukebox in the corner played some tune from before I was born. One of those songs no one paid much attention to, but somehow everyone knew the words. But that Saturday, something changed. That easy, familiar hum in the diner stuttered for a moment. The bell above the door chimed. Normally just a cheerful little sound that meant another regular coming in for their usual. But this time, something followed that chime. Something that didn't fit with the weekend rhythm. Tap scrape. Tap scrape. An 8-year-old girl stepped inside. She moved slow, steady, balancing herself on a pair of aluminum crutches that looked too big for the skinny arms holding them. Every step she took was careful, the way only someone who'd practiced this their whole life could make it. Her right leg shook with the effort, and her left leg, well, it just wasn't there. Her jeans were pinned neatly on one side, the fabric hanging empty. Her hair was tangled, framing a face that should have been full of childhood but instead carried a weight kids shouldn't ever have to know. Her clothes were washed, but the color was faded from too many scrubs and harsh soap. And her eyes, Lord, those eyes, were dark, exhausted, darting around the diner like a little creature searching for shelter in a storm. She wasn't looking for the bathroom. She wasn't looking for her parents. She was looking for somewhere, anywhere, to sit. Some stranger who might show her even the smallest hint of kindness. The whole diner went quiet in that awful way people do when they know they should care, but hope someone else takes responsibility instead. She moved past the counter, past the waitress who suddenly acted like the order tickets were the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen, past the cook who spun back toward the grill a little too fast. The first booth she tried had a family of 4, mom, dad, and 2 kids about her age busy drowning pancakes in syrup. The girl tried to speak, her mouth just starting to form words, when the mother jerked her kids closer and threw up a wall with her body. No words, just rejection. The message might as well have been painted on the booth. Not here, not with us. Her shoulders dipped, and she shuffled on. Tap scrape, tap scrape. The next booth held an elderly couple, the type who'd probably eaten here every Saturday since the place opened. They saw her coming from a mile away. The old man caught her gaze for half a heartbeat before dropping his eyes to his meatloaf, like it suddenly held the secrets of the universe. His wife started fussing with her napkin as if its folds needed perfect alignment right that second. They both pretended she didn't exist, as if ignoring her would erase the uncomfortable moment. The girl bit her lip and kept moving, her crutches squeaking across the checkered floor. Table 3 had 4 women all dressed like they'd come straight from Sunday service. Floral dresses, pearls, Bibles stacked beside iced tea glasses. Probably had just listened to a sermon about loving your neighbor. They spotted the girl from 10 feet away. One whispered behind her hand. Another nodded with a look that said she already knew how this was going to go. And when the girl finally reached their table, when she gathered every drop of courage she had to ask if she could please sit down, one of the women spoke loud enough for the whole diner to hear. Where are her parents? Not, are you all right, sweetheart? Not, do you need a hand? Just judgment. Cold, sharp judgment wrapped in a fake ribbon of concern. The girl's cheeks turned red. Her right leg trembled like it might give. Tears filled her eyes, but she forced them back with the kind of strength kids shouldn't have to muster. And if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been the person folks looked through or stepped around, you already know what that kind of moment does to a child's heart. It hollows you out, teaches you your need for kindness is a burden, makes you believe you're the problem instead of the world refusing to see you. But stay with me, because what happened next is what kept my faith in humanity alive. In the back corner, at a table built for four, but taken by just one man, sat someone most people avoided without thinking twice. That man was me, Rafe. 43 years old, 6'2", arms inked up with stories I don't talk about, a face that's met plenty of fists and had a few things to say back. I've got a scar slicing through my left eyebrow, another running along my jaw, and a nose that's been busted more times than I care to count. Never did heal straight. My hands are big, too, rough and scarred across the knuckles, the kind of hands that have built plenty of things and broken a few more. But what really makes folks look the other way is the vest. Black leather, soft from years of weather and wind. And across the back, stitched bold and unmistakable, my Hell's Angels patches. Patches I earned the long, hard way, loyalty, miles on the road, and more blood than anyone likes to talk about. Most people don't understand a life like mine, and honestly, they don't want to. They'd rather whisper about men like me from a safe distance and warn their kids not to stare too long. That afternoon, I wasn't doing anything special, just sitting there with a simple burger loaded with onions, reading an old folded newspaper while keeping to myself. I liked the Rusty Spoon for that exact reason. Good food, familiar faces, and nobody jumping to dial the cops just because a biker wanted to eat in peace. The staff knew me well enough. They didn't flinch when I walked in. They treated me like anyone else who came in hungry and minded his own business. Then I heard it again. Tap scrape. Tap scrape. That sound cut straight through the chatter like someone had sliced the room open with a knife. I lifted my eyes from the paper, my burger still halfway to my mouth, and saw that little girl, the same one who'd been turned away by every table in the place, making her slow, painful way toward me. Each step looked like it took every ounce of strength she had left. She stopped right in front of my booth, close enough that I could see the smudge of dirt on her cheek and the way her tiny chest rose and fell from the effort of crossing the diner. Her tangled hair clung to her face, knotted in a way that told me nobody had brushed it for her in quite a while. Her clothes were thin at the elbows and knees, bleached from too many washes in water that had probably been too hot. But it was her eyes that hit me hardest. Dark, tired, full of a fear I knew too damn well. I'd seen that look in mirrors after rough nights, and in the eyes of men who'd been beaten down by life one blow at a time. There was fear in her gaze, fear and a desperate kind of hope people get when they've run out of options. Her voice came out so faint, I had to lean forward just to catch it over the dishes clattering around us. Please, can I sit here? Everyone else said no. 7 little words. That's all it took. 7 words carrying the weight of every rejection she'd taken on that short walk through the diner. Every adult who'd decided she wasn't worth the trouble. Every cold shoulder. Every averted gaze. I didn't stop to think about it. Didn't care what anybody else in the place might assume. Didn't bother worrying about whether people would judge me for letting her sit at my table. I nudged the chair across from me out with my boot, and the legs scraped across the floor louder than I meant them to. Yes, sweetheart, I said. Sit. The relief that flooded her face. God, it almost cracked something open in my chest. She tried to move toward the chair, but her tired right leg trembled and gave out just enough to throw her balance. Her crutches slipped and hit the floor with a metallic crash that sent half the diner staring again. Always staring, never lifting a damn finger to help. I was out of my seat before she even bent down. I scooped up the crutches, felt tiny in my hands, and set them gently against the wall so they wouldn't fall again. Then I pulled her chair out a little farther and held it steady while she eased herself down with slow, practiced movements. You could tell she'd been doing all this on her own for a long time. As she settled in, her jacket shifted, and that's when I saw it. The first crack in whatever story she wasn't saying out loud. A yellow bruise blooming across her right cheekbone. Old enough to be fading, but deep enough to have been purple not long ago. And on her upper arm, where her sleeve had slipped up, were darker marks. Fingerprints. Not hers. Not a child's. Adult. Someone who'd grabbed her hard enough to leave a reminder behind. My jaw tightened before I could stop it. I felt the muscles in my face clench, my hands curling on the back of her chair until I forced myself to breathe and loosen up again. I'd spent 2 decades in a world where violence wasn't rare, it was currency. I'd seen men get beaten senseless over debts or pride. I'd watched bar fights that left teeth scattered across the floor. I'd lived through things most regular folks would lose sleep over for months. But this? A kid, marked up like somebody's punching bag, so starved for kindness that she'd approached the roughest-looking man in the whole diner because at least I hadn't already told her no? Yeah, something was very, very wrong. And with the life I'd lived and the things I'd seen, I'd learned one truth you don't forget. When a child shows up alone, bruised, scared, and asking strangers for help, you don't look away. You don't pretend it's not your business. You don't wait for someone else to step in. You pay attention. You ask questions. You become the one who gives a damn when everyone else decides not to. I kept my voice low and gentle, soft enough to surprise anyone who only ever looked at the outside of me. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She swallowed, her voice barely a breath. "Lyra. You hungry, Lyra?" She nodded slowly, eyes wide like she honestly wasn't sure if she was allowed to say yes. Like the question might be some sort of trick with a wrong answer. Her hands were twisted together in her lap, those skinny fingers knotted up like they'd been living in that anxious position for a long time. I raised my hand and caught the eye of the waitress, Marie. She'd been working at the Rusty Spoon longer than I'd been darkening its doorway. She walked over with her order pad ready, and if she thought it was strange seeing a Hell's Angel sitting across from a bruised-up little girl, she kept it off her face. Maybe after all these years, she'd figured out something most people never learn, that the roughest-looking folks can sometimes carry the biggest hearts. "Grilled cheese, fries, and a chocolate milkshake," I said, not taking my eyes off Lyra. "Extra pickles on the side if you got him." Marie gave a small nod and headed back toward the kitchen, leaving us in a little pocket of quiet. I leaned back slightly, giving the kid space, letting her just sit and breathe without someone crowding her. When the food came out, perfectly toasted grilled cheese with melted cheese oozing at the edges, fries still shining with salt and oil, and a tall glass of thick chocolate shake crowned with whipped cream. Lyra looked at it like it might vanish if she moved too fast. "Go ahead," I told her softly. "It's all yours." And then she ate. Not like most kids do, laughing, talking, crumbs everywhere. No, she ate like someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. Because she hadn't. She took quick, sharp bites, like at any second a hand might swoop in and yank the plate away. Her fingers shook as she lifted the sandwich. Her chewing was fast and mechanical, all survival, no joy. Every few seconds, her eyes flicked up, checking that I was still there, like I might disappear or tell her it was all a mistake. I didn't press her, didn't pepper her with questions, didn't ask for explanations she wasn't ready to give. I just let her eat. Let her sit in that booth and feel safe, maybe for the first time in longer than I wanted to imagine. I picked up my own burger and took a slow bite, trying to show her with my actions that this was normal. She belonged at this table. There was no rush, no catch, no trick. Around us, the diner slowly found its rhythm again. Conversation started back up. Dishes clinked. The jukebox clicked over to another old tune. And little by little, as she kept eating, I watched the tightness in her shoulders start to loosen. The tension in her small frame eased, just a bit. She took a sip of the milkshake, and for half a heartbeat, something that looked like a smile ghosted across her face before it vanished again. Finally, somewhere between bites, she spoke. Her voice was a little stronger this time, but still soft. "I'm not supposed to be here." I set my burger down and wiped my hands on a napkin, giving her my full attention. "Where are you supposed to be?" I asked. "Home." The word came out flat. No warmth. No comfort. No feeling of safety. But I couldn't stay there anymore. I leaned in just a little, resting my elbows on the table, trying to make myself seem smaller even though I knew that was a losing battle with my size. "Why not?" I asked gently. Her hands started to tremble again. The fork she'd been using for the fries slipped from her fingers and clattered against the plate. The sound felt way too loud in that moment. Her breathing picked up, shaky and uneven. Tears filled her eyes. Tears she'd clearly been fighting off for a long time. Maybe weeks. Maybe months. Maybe longer. And then, the dam finally broke. Tears streamed down her face. at first silent, sliding over the faded yellow bruises and dripping onto her worn-out shirt. Then the quiet tears turned into sobs, raw, harsh, gut-deep sobs. The kind that come from a place inside where pain goes when it has nowhere else to live. Her whole body shook with it. The diner fell silent again. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Forks froze halfway to mouths. But this time, it wasn't judgment hanging in the air. It was something heavier, uncomfortable awareness. The sense that something truly awful was unraveling right in front of them, and nobody knew how to handle it. "He hurts me," she choked out between sobs. "My stepdad." The words cracked in the middle, each one coming out broken. "After my mom died, after I lost my leg, everything changed. My blood ran cold." There's a feeling you get sometimes, when you know, deep down, that whatever you're about to hear is going to shift your whole world. Like the floor under your feet just moved an inch, but you felt every millimeter of it. My hands, resting on the table, curled slowly into fists. Every muscle in my body went tight, but my voice stayed calm, quiet. I knew if I let the anger boiling in my chest spill out, she might shut down. And she needed to talk. She needed someone to finally listen all the way through. "How'd you lose your leg, Lyra?" I asked. She dropped her gaze to her lap, and I watched her face fill with shame. A kind of shame that had no business being there, because none of this was her fault. "He said it was an accident," she whispered, and each word sounded like it hurt to say. "I was in the garage, and he was backing out the truck, but he knew I was there. He saw me, and he didn't stop." Those words hung in the air like poison, like smoke from a fire that had been burning hidden behind closed doors for way too long. An accident. That's what he'd call it. That's what he'd tell the neighbors, the doctors, maybe even child services, if they bothered to show up. Just one of those terrible accidents. A tragic mistake. You know how people talk. These things happen. Except no, not like that. Not when you see a child and keep moving anyway. I didn't move a muscle. On the outside, I was stone still. But inside, something old and rough and dangerous woke up. That part of me that had spent 20 years seeing the worst in people. The part that knew evil doesn't always wear a mask or carry a weapon. Sometimes it stands in a driveway and smiles for the neighbors. That bruise on her cheek. Those purple fingerprints on her arm. They weren't just marks anymore. They were evidence. A pattern. Proof that what happened in that garage wasn't the end of something. It was the start of something much darker. And if you believe kids deserve to be protected, if you believe men like that shouldn't be allowed to keep doing what they do, then go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now. Because this story goes to some dark places. But I promise you this, justice is on its way. My voice dropped lower, steady and firm, the kind of tone that says two things at once. "You're safe, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Lyra," I said quietly, "I need you to tell me everything. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." When I told her I wasn't going anywhere, it wasn't just words. Most folks toss out promises the way they toss napkins onto a table, carelessly, without any weight behind them. But for me, a promise is the one thing a man has that actually means something. Loyalty is a language I spent my whole life learning, and I don't speak it lightly. And somehow, this kid, this bruised, trembling 8-year-old, seemed to understand that. She looked at me with those tired eyes, like she could feel the truth behind what I said, like she knew deep down that I meant every damn syllable. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing tears across the fading bruise on her cheek. Her voice shook, but her determination didn't. "After my mom died, he changed," she said. "He got mean. Started locking the fridge. Said I didn't deserve to eat if I couldn't work." Those words hit me like punches, one after another, each harder than the last. What kind of grown man looks at a child? A child who just lost her mother. A child who already lost her leg. A child who needed comfort, not cruelty, and decides she doesn't deserve food? What kind of monster takes grief and turns it into punishment? "I'm 8," she whispered, almost like she had to remind herself, because the world around her sure wasn't treating her like a kid. 8 years old. An age when your biggest problems should be spelling tests and playground drama, not starvation. Under the table, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles went white. Part of me wanted to stand up, walk straight out of that diner, and go find this man. People like him only understand one kind of lesson, and I've delivered plenty in my time. But I didn't move. I breathed. I listened, because right then, what Lyra needed wasn't my anger, She needed someone steady, someone who wouldn't scare her away. Her voice cracked again as she kept going, breaking around words too big and heavy for a kid her age to carry. But the worst part, she whispered. She stared at her half-eaten fries, the melting milkshake, anywhere except my face. Saying it out loud meant admitting it was real. I heard him on the phone about 3 weeks ago. He didn't know I was listening. Her fingers twisted together again, nervous, frightened, holding secrets too painful for her small hands. He told someone. She swallowed hard, then forced the rest out. He said, if she doesn't make it, I can cash out the policy just like I did when her mother got sick. The air left my lungs. For a moment, the whole diner faded away. The clatter of plates, the hum of conversations, even the music, everything blurred out like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears. All I could hear were those words repeating in my skull. If she doesn't make it, cash out the policy, just like I did when her mother got sick. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't even the kind of abuse born from anger, addiction, or a broken cycle. This was murder. Slow, deliberate, and calculated. Disguised behind the mask of a grieving husband forced to care for a disabled stepchild alone. Oh, the poor man. What a burden. How noble of him to try. Except he wasn't trying. He was waiting. Starving her. Hurting her. Creating just the right conditions so that, if she doesn't make it, wouldn't raise many questions. People would shake their heads and say things like, at least her suffering is over. And the system, deeply flawed and overworked, might sign off on a death certificate without looking too closely. Disabled child. Neglectful home. Sometimes they fade away. Tragic, yes. Suspicious? Not necessarily. At least, not to anyone who didn't want to see the truth. But that insurance policy, God help me, that sentence, just like I did when her mother got sick, opened a whole new door of horror. How had her mother really died? Had it been illness? Or something else, slower, quieter, disguised as a medical tragedy? Had this man looked at his wife the same way he now looked at her daughter? Not as human, but as a payout? Not as family, but as a payday waiting to happen? I'd seen more darkness in my 43 years than most people can imagine. I'd seen men beat each other over pocket change. I'd seen bodies broken beyond recognition on highways. I'd walked into bars where violence hung in the air thicker than cigarette smoke. I'd dealt with overdoses, suicides, and cruelty in forms that stain your soul. But sitting across from me now was a new level of evil. This child, this brave, fragile kid with tangled hair and one remaining leg, had figured it out. She'd connected the dots the adults around her had missed or ignored. She knew her stepfather was trying to kill her, and nobody believed her. Who listens to a child over a grieving adult? Who questions a man who shows up at school meetings with a sad voice and talks about his disabled stepdaughter's struggles? No one. That's the truth. Nobody looked close enough. Nobody cared enough. Until now. Until a scarred biker in a corner booth shoved out a chair and said, "Yeah, sweetheart. Sit." Until someone finally, gave enough of a damn to hear her. I rose slowly, my chair scraping the tile with a sharp sound that cut through the hum of the diner. The movement was controlled, measured, but Lyra's eyes went wide with panic. She'd seen it before, adults standing up, walking away, abandoning her the second things got complicated. "Lyra," I said calmly, bending slightly so I was on her level. "I need you to stay right here. Finish your food. I'll be back in 2 minutes. I promise." That's what I told her. But the truth is, Lyra had heard promises her whole life. Promises that meant nothing. Her stepfather had promised to take care of her after her mom died. Social workers promised to check on her. Teachers promised they'd follow up. And every single one of those promises had dissolved into thin air. So when I said the words, I knew they didn't carry much weight with her yet. Her hand shot forward fast, pure instinct, and grabbed 2 of my fingers, holding on with a desperation that nearly stopped my heart. Her tiny grip was shaking, but strong, like she was clinging to the last safe thing in her world. Panic flooded her face, tears rising again in eyes that had already cried more in a single day than any kid should cry in a year. Hell, in a lifetime. "You're not leaving me, are you?" she asked. That question cut straight through me. It wasn't just fear, it was certainty. She truly believed I was about to walk away like everyone else had. Another adult deciding she was too much. I lowered myself to my knees in front of her, slow, steady, until her eyes met mine, and she could see every truth written on my face. "I'm not leaving you," I told her. "Not ever. But I am going to make sure that man never hurts you again. Trust me. Not I'll be right back. Not everything will be okay. Just ever." One word that meant forever. One word that meant commitment. One word that told this child, rejected by every table in this diner, that she had finally found someone who wasn't going anywhere. The weight of that word settled between us like something solid, something real, stronger than any legal document, stronger than any signature. She gave me a tiny nod, barely more than a twitch. It wasn't full trust. She'd had that beaten out of her long ago, but it was a start. It was a child deciding she'd take one more chance on an adult keeping his word. I stood slowly, letting my hand rest on her small shoulder for an extra beat. A silent message. "I see you. I'm here. You matter." Then I turned toward the door. My boots hit the floor with purpose. My jaw locked into a hard line. Anyone who'd spent even 5 minutes around men like me would have recognized the expression on my face. It was the look right before consequences. The look right before action. The look the world sees when it's about to learn what happens when someone harms a person under a Hell's Angels protection. I stepped into the afternoon sun. The street looked peaceful, too peaceful. Fresh-cut lawns, flower beds, cars cruising lazily by. The kind of place where people let themselves forget that monsters can live behind front doors with wreaths and welcome mats. I pulled my phone from my vest, thumbed through the contacts, and hit a number I knew by heart. It rang once. "Brick, it's Rafe." His voice came through like gravel and whiskey, rough, familiar, steady. A man who'd answered more than his share of calls like this. "What's up, brother? I need every brother within 20 miles at the Rusty Spoon. Now." There was a pause. Not hesitation, just calculation. Brick and I had ridden together for 15 years. He knew my tone. He knew exactly what it meant. "What's going on?" "Child abuse. Possible murder plot. And we're not waiting for the cops to investigate." Another pause. Shorter this time. "Say no more. We're coming." Click. The line went dead. And that was that. No requests for evidence. No legal worries. No questions at all. Just "we're coming." Because that's what brotherhood is. When a brother calls, you show up. No hesitation, no excuses, no looking the other way. I stood on the sidewalk with the phone still in my hand and waited. The sun warmed my face. Cars rolled by, their drivers completely unaware of how close a little girl came to going home with a man who was slowly killing her. A woman walked her dog. A teenager skated past. Life continued like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. And within 12 minutes, the quiet street outside the Rusty Spoon changed. The rumble started soft, like thunder far off in the distance. Then it grew, and grew, until the ground practically vibrated with it. The roar shook storefront windows, set off a couple car alarms, and made everyone within 3 blocks freeze and look toward the sound. Bikes. Dozens of them. Hell's Angels from 3 counties. Men who got the call and dropped everything. Jobs, meals, weekend plans. Because one of their own needed them. They rolled in like a storm. Leather vests flashing the same patch I wore. Chrome gleaming in the sun. Engines thundering with power and purpose. They lined the street on both sides, kicking down stands, dismounting with the sharp efficiency of men who'd spent half their lives riding together. Big men. Scarred men. Men with pasts written in ink and police reports. Men who made polite society flinch. And they were here for a little girl they'd never even met. Here to protect her. Here to deliver the justice the system hadn't. Brick pulled up last, his bike the loudest, and walked toward me. Gray in his beard, eyes like someone who'd lived through everything twice. "Fill me in," he said. I gave him the short version. The bruises. The starvation. The accident that took her leg. The insurance policy. The overheard phone call that turned everything from tragedy to horror. By the time I finished, Brick's face had gone cold as iron. "Where's the girl?" he asked. "Inside. At my table." "And the stepfather?" "Home," I said. "For now." Brick nodded once, then turned to the assembled brothers, 30 of them, maybe more, men standing ready because a small, brave kid had asked a stranger if she could share his table. I walked back into the diner. Every head turned. The family of 4, the elderly couple, the church women, all staring now, not with rejection, but something new. Fear, respect, realization. They finally understood something. They should have said yes to that girl. People inside that diner started to understand something. They'd made a choice when they turned that little girl away, and so had I. And now they were watching the consequences of those choices unfold right in front of them. I sat back down across from Lyra and gave her a small, steady smile. You're safe now, kid. If you're on her side, if you still believe there are folks in this world willing to stand up for a child, drop "protect the innocent" in the comments right now. Let's show the world how many people still believe in justice. What happened next wasn't chaos. It was control. It was calculation. It was protection done right. A lot of people misunderstand motorcycle clubs. They see leather jackets, patched vests, tough faces, and assume violence is the only language we speak. They imagine fists before facts, rage before reason. They picture broken windows and broken bones and a trail of trouble everywhere we go. But not today. Not for this. My brothers didn't storm into Lyra's house. They didn't kick down doors or threaten anyone. They didn't do the loud, messy thing that would have felt good for 5 minutes and accomplished nothing in the long run. They did something smarter, something that would stick. Something that would protect her not just today, but forever. They gathered evidence. Jax and Tommy, two guys who'd been chewed up by the system and had learned exactly how it fails people, went door to door in Lyra's neighborhood. They didn't intimidate anybody. They didn't posture or raise their voices. They knocked politely, introduced themselves, asked the right questions in calm, steady tones. And the more they asked, the more it became clear. People had noticed. A lot. They remembered a little girl who used to play outside on her crutches. A kid who used to wave at cars and laugh loud enough for the sound to carry down the street. And then she just stopped being seen. One old man, out tending his garden, admitted he'd wondered why she disappeared. But he didn't want to interfere. A younger mother said she'd heard yelling. No, screaming. From the house. A child's voice begging someone to stop. But she hadn't called anyone. She didn't want to be wrong or make things worse. She didn't want to step into something messy. Then a woman in her 50s stepped outside. Her hands were shaking. She admitted she'd called Child Protective Services twice. Twice. She told them the little girl next door seemed in danger, that something wasn't right. The stepfather's behavior terrified her. But nothing ever happened. Maybe CPS sent someone and he fooled them with a clean kitchen and a convincing tone. Maybe her report got buried under a pile of other reports. Maybe nobody even read it. Either way, Lyra stayed in that house. And the abuse kept going. Inside the diner, Marie quietly moved us to a larger table in the corner. 3 of my brothers sat with Lyra, men different from the ones canvassing outside. These were the gentle ones. Soft-spoken, steady, calm, the kind of presence that wounded people feel safe near. Marcus, who'd been a crisis counselor before the road called his name, started talking to her. He asked questions with the patience of someone who understood trauma, someone who knew memories can come in fragments, that an 8-year-old needed space and kindness, not pressure. They wrote down everything. Every date she could remember, every bruise, every locked fridge, how many meals she'd missed, her mother's death, the accident in the garage, the phone call about the insurance money, all of it. They didn't rush her. They let her breathe when she needed to, let her cry when it hit too hard, let her take sips of her milkshake or nibble on fries when she needed a moment to regroup. Meanwhile, another brother, Dane, a former cop who left the force because he got tired of watching cases vanish into filing cabinets, made calls. Not the kind of calls that go nowhere. Real calls. He contacted someone inside CPS who actually had authority. Someone who cared. Someone who wouldn't lose this report under a coffee mug or stack of paperwork. Dane laid it out clean. A minor with physical evidence of repeated abuse. Signs of deliberate starvation. Suspicious circumstances around her amputated leg. A potential insurance fraud scheme involving the child's death. He made one thing absolutely clear. If they didn't act immediately, not tomorrow, not when someone was available, and this child ended up dead, there would be consequences. Media, legal, career-ending consequences. The investigator said they'd be there within the hour. And the whole time, I stayed right by Lyra, holding her hand, letting her lean against me when she needed to. Being the one constant thing she had in this whole upside-down situation. She was surrounded by men who looked like they could tear someone in half with their bare hands. But she wasn't afraid, because they weren't looking at her with pity or discomfort or that polite avoidance she was used to. They looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth protecting. Like getting this right was the most important thing we'd done in a long time. So when the officers eventually showed up, and they did, because Dane made sure of it, we didn't hand them suspicions or guesses or a scared kid's word against an adult's. We handed them a file. A complete, undeniable, well-documented file. We had everything we needed, more than enough for the authorities to finally take this seriously. For neighbors gave statements. They had photographs of Lyra's bruises, taken carefully, good lighting, proper angles, proper documentation. The kind of photos that hold up in court, the kind no defense attorney can argue away. There was even a recorded statement from a neighbor who'd overheard Lyra's stepfather sitting on his back porch, laughing, talking to someone on the phone about having one less mouth to feed, once the kid was gone. No one could ignore that. Not now. Not anymore. There were too many voices, too many details, too much truth staring them right in the face. Because here's the heartbreaking part. Lyra had tried to tell people before. She told a teacher once, back when she still made it to school regularly. The teacher had looked concerned, listened a little, asked a couple of soft questions, but in the end convinced herself it wasn't enough to report. Just a girl adjusting to loss, she told herself. Just a child going through a hard patch. She tried again with a school counselor. Same story. The counselor meant well, but she accepted the stepfather's explanation that Lyra was grieving, struggling, acting out. That she was making things up for attention. And she even tried to tell a cop. A real police officer who came for a welfare check after that neighbor's second call to CPS finally pushed someone to do something. But the officer took one look at her stepfather, clean shirt, calm voice, well-rehearsed story, and believed every word out of his mouth. He wrote up a neat little report. Home tidy. Child appears cared for. No evidence of abuse. And that was that. Every single time, people believed the adult over the child. They believed the charming man over the traumatized little girl. They chose the performance over the truth. But I didn't need charm. Didn't need rehearsed lines. Didn't need a fake smile. I needed the truth, and I fought like hell to make sure it finally landed where it needed to. It was 4:47 in the afternoon when the cruisers finally pulled up to the address Lyra had given us. Elmwood Drive. A quiet street full of neat lawns and pastel-colored siding. Her house had pale yellow siding, white shutters, the kind of place you pass 100 times without thinking twice. The kind of house that made you believe nice families lived behind those walls. But behind that door, a child had been slowly destroyed. The stepfather, David Corwin, was in the garage when the cops arrived. The garage door stood open, sunlight pouring in. He was bent over the engine of his truck, turning a wrench like it was any ordinary Saturday afternoon. The same truck that had taken Lyra's leg 8 months earlier. The same truck he'd driven to the hospital while pretending to be the panicked stepfather who'd made a terrible mistake. He didn't even see the cruisers pull up. He was humming, probably thinking about dinner. Probably wondering how much longer it would take before the insurance company cut him a check worth $250,000. Maybe he was wondering why Lyra wasn't home yet. Maybe he didn't care. The officers didn't waste time. No small talk. No gentle questions. No giving him the benefit of the doubt like every authority figure before them had. They had the file Dane put together. They had the witness statements. They had pictures of bruises on an 8-year-old child. They walked straight up to him and read him his rights. He froze, wrench still in his hand. Confusion flashed across his face first. Then indignation. Then fear. In less than 10 seconds, he shifted through every expression a guilty man wears when his world finally catches up with him. He tried to talk, tried to explain, tried to turn on that charm that had fooled teachers, counselors, neighbors, and cops for months. He used the same voice he always used. There must be some mistake. I can explain everything. My stepdaughter has been through so much. But the cops weren't listening. Not this time. They spun him around, locked cuffs on his wrists with a sharp metallic click that echoed across the quiet street, and walked him toward the cruiser. Neighbors began stepping out onto porches. Some stared in shock, because David had always seemed so nice. Polite. Helpful. The kind of man who'd lend you his lawn mower or offer to jumpstart your battery on cold mornings. Others looked relieved, like they'd been carrying a heavy suspicion for months and finally had it confirmed. The elderly woman who'd called CPS twice stood on her porch, shaking. I knew something was wrong, she whispered to her husband. I knew it. He squeezed her hand. Said nothing. But the guilt on his face said plenty. Everyone on that street realized something at the same time. They'd seen pieces of this, heard pieces of this, felt pieces of this, and they'd chosen to believe it wasn't their business. Until the truth marched right into their driveway in handcuffs. But the cops didn't stop at the arrest. They searched the house top to bottom, carefully, methodically, documenting everything. And what they found made even seasoned officers go pale. They found Lyra's room. Lyra's room wasn't a room at all. It was a converted storage closet shoved at the back of the house, so small you could touch both walls without stretching your arms out. A narrow window sat high on the far wall, but someone had painted right over the glass so no sunlight could slip through. Inside was a single mattress on the floor. Thin, stained. The kind of mattress most folks toss on the curb because it's not fit for anyone to sleep on. No frame, no blanket, not even a pillow, just that miserable piece of padding and a cardboard box with a few clothes inside. Every item was too small for her. Every piece so worn it was practically see-through. And on the outside of the door, high up where a child couldn't reach even if she stacked furniture, was a deadbolt. A lock meant to keep someone in. This wasn't neglect. This was imprisonment. In the kitchen, the officers found the refrigerator, and it was padlocked shut. Not with some flimsy dollar store lock. This one was heavy-duty, the kind you'd need bolt cutters to break. The cabinets were the same way, all locked up tight. Even if Lyra had managed to slip out of that tiny room, she wouldn't have been able to get a single bite of food. The only food in her reach were a few cans of vegetables sitting on an open shelf. All of them needed a can opener. There wasn't one anywhere in the house. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate starvation. In David Corwin's office, neat, spotless, decorated with motivational posters about success and perseverance, they found the insurance policy, filed carefully under financial planning, alphabetized between auto coverage and retirement paperwork. A $250,000 policy on Lyra's life, taken out 6 months earlier, just weeks after her mother's death. David Corwin listed as the sole beneficiary. Payout valid for accidental or natural causes. Natural causes. As if an 8-year-old dying from starvation in a locked room could ever be called natural. Beneath that folder was another document, an older insurance policy, this time on Lyra's mother. She had died of complications from pneumonia, according to the certificate. The payout? $180,000. Issued exactly 2 months after the policy was purchased, right at the edge of the period when insurance companies are most suspicious. David Corwin wasn't a man who lost control. He wasn't someone who made bad decisions while grieving. He was a predator, one who viewed human beings, his own family, as assets he could cash out when they stopped being useful. He had perfected the art of killing slowly enough that it looked like tragedy instead of homicide. Slowly enough that people said, "Poor man, he's been through so much," while he piled up payouts in neatly labeled folders. And he almost got away with it. He would have gotten away with it if an 8-year-old girl hadn't walked into a diner on her crutches and asked a stranger if she could sit at his table. If that stranger hadn't looked past his own scars and reputation and seen a child who needed saving. If that stranger didn't have brothers who believed justice isn't just about following procedure, it's about making sure the right thing actually gets done. Lyra was taken to County General that evening. The ambulance didn't come roaring in with sirens and lights. It came quiet, respectful, because this wasn't the usual kind of emergency. There was no fresh wound to stitch shut, no bone to set. But it was an emergency all the same. Just the slow-moving kind, the kind the world ignores until it's almost too late. She wasn't being transported for a new injury, though the doctors found plenty of old ones. She was being taken in because she was dangerously malnourished. The type of malnourishment that doesn't happen in days or weeks. The kind that comes from months of intentional starvation. A body eating itself just to survive. Organs choosing what functions to keep and what is shut down. Growth stopping altogether because living another day becomes the only priority. The paramedics were gentle with her, almost tender. They'd heard the story by then. The whole town would hear it soon, but the first responders already knew. They lifted her onto the gurney with soft hands, talked to her in quiet voices, treated her like she wasn't a burden or a piece of evidence, but a child who had survived something unimaginable. I climbed into the ambulance with her. My frame filled half the space, but I didn't care. I wasn't going anywhere. One paramedic tried to suggest that I could meet them at the hospital instead. I just looked at him. One look, and the conversation ended. I promised Lyra I wasn't leaving. Ever. And I don't break promises. At the hospital, they put her in a private room on the pediatric floor. Not because she needed isolation, but because she needed peace. The walls were painted bright yellow with cartoon characters dancing across them. Most kids probably ignored that stuff. But Lyra stared at those walls like they were something magical, like she'd forgotten rooms could be warm or cheerful or meant for kids. I sat in the chair beside her bed while nurses moved in and out with practiced speed. Her blood pressure was dangerously low. Her heart rate was too fast. Her temperature too cold. Her body didn't have enough fuel to keep her warm. They hooked her 2 and 4, one for hydration, one for nutrition. Refeeding had to be done carefully. Too much too quickly could kill someone who'd been starved as long as she had. Doctors came one after another. A pediatrician who documented every bruise and every sign of neglect. An orthopedic surgeon who studied her amputation site and shook his head at the improper healing. A child psychologist who simply introduced herself and promised to be there when Lyra was ready. Social workers filled out more paperwork than I've seen in my entire life. Emergency custody forms, CPS alerts, medical authorizations, legal protections to keep David Corwin 100 miles away from this kid for the rest of his life. I signed what I could, answered what I knew, stayed out of the way when the professionals needed space. And when Lyra finally drifted off to sleep, not the restless half-sleep of a frightened child, but real, deep, safe sleep, I stayed right there beside her. Lyra slept. Not that restless half-sleep kids learn when they're forced to stay alert for danger, waking at every sound, every footstep, every shift in the house. This was different. This was deep, peaceful, heavy sleep, the kind you only fall into when your body finally believes it's safe. And I stayed right there with her. I stayed when the night nurses came on at 11 p.m., whispering introductions as they checked her vitals. I stayed through the long stretch of early morning when hospitals get quiet, but never completely silent. I stayed until dawn slipped through the window and painted the room with that soft, pale light that means a new day is coming whether you're ready or not. Around midnight, my brothers showed up with coffee. Brick brought a thermos and a sandwich from some all-night diner. He didn't say anything, didn't have to. He just set them on the table beside me and put a hand on my shoulder. That one gesture said everything he didn't speak out loud. Throughout the night and into Sunday morning, they brought food. Nothing fancy, just things to keep me going. Men who live on the road know that sometimes the most important kind of care is practical care. Calories, warmth, hydration. Fuel for the body when the soul's carrying too much. They even brought me a change of clothes, fresh shirt, clean socks, because I'd been wearing the same jeans and tee I'd had on since Saturday afternoon. It was their way of reminding me that if I was going to be strong for her, I had to take care of myself too. And they kept watch. Not inside the room. That space belonged to me, Lyra, and the nurses who needed to work. But outside, they formed a perimeter. 2 brothers in the hallway. A few in the waiting area. More in the parking lot, where their bikes formed a steel and chrome barricade that sent a clear message. No one gets to this child without going through us first. They weren't acting threatening, just present. Solid. A living wall. When parents came off the elevators to visit their own sick kids, the guys nodded politely and let them pass. But around 9 that morning, when a man in an expensive suit stepped off the elevator, a lawyer for David Corwin, 2 of my brothers stepped forward and made it crystal clear he needed to turn around. He did. Spider, who'd been a combat medic in Afghanistan before the club became his family, checked in with the nurses every hour or so. He made sure they had anything they needed, brought them real coffee from the cafe down the street instead of that watery cafeteria stuff. He thanked them for taking care of Lyra. Meant every word of it, too. And the nurses? Most of them had seen bikers before, but usually on the trauma end of things, not like this. But these men spoke softly, moved gently, treated this little girl like she was the center of the world. You could see their opinions shifting. You could see them starting to understand something most folks never do. This is who we are. People see leather, patches, tattoos, and assume they know everything about us. They think outlaw means monster. They think scars mean danger. They think rough men can't hold soft hearts. But the truth is simpler. We protect our own. Always. When someone becomes family, not by blood, but by choice, you build a wall around them. A wall made of brothers, loyalty, and the promise that if anyone wants to hurt them, they'll have to go through all of us first. And Lyra? She became family the moment I pushed that chair out for her and said, "Yeah, sweetheart, sit." From the moment she told me her story, from the moment those brothers dropped everything and rode in without a second thought. She might have been 8 years old, tiny, wounded, missing a leg, but she was ours now. Family. And family means forever. 3 weeks later, we found ourselves in a quiet courtroom that smelled like old wood, paper, and the kind of justice that takes too long to arrive. Judge Margaret Reyes sat behind the bench, 17 years on the job, thousands of cases behind her. She'd seen the whole spectrum of child welfare hearings, the hopeful ones, the hopeless ones, and the ones that left her wondering at 3 in the morning if she'd made the right call. But this file, this one stopped her. She sat with it for an hour, looking at the photos of bruises on an 8-year-old body, reading witness statements that described a whole neighborhood failing a child, examining insurance documents that were so cold, calculated, and deliberate they felt like something out of a crime novel. And then there was the unusual piece. Me, the Hell's Angel who picked up the phone, the biker who refused to leave her side, the man who'd stayed with her every single day since. The courtroom wasn't crowded. These cases aren't put on display. They're private, intimate, meant only for the people who matter. Lyra sat in the front row, her crutches leaning against the bench. She was wearing new clothes, ones that fit, a warm sweater, shoes that didn't flop open at the seams. She'd gained a little weight in 3 weeks. Not much. Healing from starvation isn't quick, but enough to soften the hollows in her cheeks, enough that her arms didn't look like fragile sticks anymore. I sat beside her. I'd cleaned up as best I could, trimmed my beard, pulled on my least-worn jeans, put a button-down shirt under my vest because someone told me judges appreciated the effort. Didn't hide my patches. Couldn't hide my tattoos. The scars on my face were still there, telling stories I never bothered to explain. Behind us sat a whole row of brothers. Not every man who'd shown up at the diner that day, but a solid dozen. Brick, Dane, Marcus, Spider, Jax. Men whose silent presence said one very loud thing. We stand with him. They had been told to dress appropriately. And for bikers, that meant freshly washed denim, shirts without rips, vests polished clean, boots brushed. Still unmistakable. Still brothers. Still a wall. My brothers had cleaned up as best as bikers can, but there was no hiding what they were, and they weren't trying to. They weren't pretending to be something polite society would approve of. They showed up as themselves, patched, inked, rough around the edges, and absolutely solid where it mattered. The social worker assigned to Lyra sat at one of the tables, papers spread everywhere in that organized chaos you see only from people who juggle too many cases with not nearly enough time or support. The state's attorney sat at another table, mostly just observing. This hearing wasn't a fight. The stepfather was in jail, facing several serious charges. No one was arguing to send Lyra back to that house. The only question left was simple and enormous at the same time. Where does she go now? Judge Reyes cleared her throat gently and focused on Lyra. Her voice softened in that way people learn after years of talking to hurt kids, careful not to make them feel like they're being questioned. Lyra, she said softly, you've been through far more than any child should ever have to endure. More than many adults could survive with their spirit still intact. And I want you to hear me very clearly. None of it was your fault. Not the abuse. Not your mother's death. Not the loss of your leg. None of it. Lyra nodded a little, eyes already shining. Not with sadness, but with something that looked like hope mixed with fear. Like she wanted to believe the judge, but she'd learned the hard way that hoping too much was dangerous. And now, the judge continued, we have to talk about what comes next. You've been staying at a foster care facility since your release from the hospital. I hope the people there have been treating you kindly. Yes, ma'am, Lyra whispered. I'm glad to hear that. But that's temporary. That's not a home. What we're here to decide today is where your home will be, where you'll be loved, where you'll be safe, where you can be a child again. Judge Reyes leaned forward slightly, her voice steady and warm. So I'm going to ask you something important. There is no wrong answer. Whatever you say, we will make work. Lyra, is there someone you feel safe with? Someone you'd like to be with? The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The social worker froze mid-page. The state's attorney lifted his head. My brothers behind us leaned in ever so slightly, barely breathing. And that's when Lyra reached out. Her small hand, those same fingers that had once clung to crutches so hard they bruised, stretched across the space between us and wrapped around my palm. Her hand looked tiny against mine, swallowed up by calloused skin and old scars. But she wasn't afraid. She wasn't hesitant. She looked up at me first, not at the judge. Like she needed to see in my eyes that she wasn't asking too much, that what she wanted wasn't going to be taken away. My own eyes stung. I nodded, just the slightest nod, and I squeezed her hand back. Then Lyra turned to Judge Reyes, and her voice, still soft, but clear and sure, carried across the courtroom. "Him," she said, pointing at me just in case anyone missed it. "He saved me." My throat closed up. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. I knew this was possible. The social worker had spoken to me about it, explained the process, the requirements, the background checks. She'd asked if I'd even want to be considered, and I'd said yes. But hearing it from Lyra, from this little girl who had survived things nobody should ever face, was completely different. I'm a biker. I have a past. I've got assault charges from my 20s, a couple disturbing the peace citations, and one old DUI from a younger, dumber version of myself. I've done time in county lockup. I've lived rough. I've fought more fights than I should have. I've made more mistakes than I can count. My house is half garage, half home. Motorcycle parts cover most of the living room. My fridge usually holds beer, leftovers, and condiments. A balanced meal normally means the pizza has mushrooms on it. I've never raised a child. Never braided hair. Never helped with homework. Never prepared myself for the day a little girl might ask me what to do when she gets her first period. I'm 43 years old and have avoided responsibility most of my life, with the exception of my bike. But Judge Reyes smiled. Not a polite courtroom smile. A real smile. A warm, human one that softened her entire face. Because she'd read everything. She'd read the reports from the hospital, how I'd stayed every single day, sleeping in that uncomfortable chair, eating cafeteria food, only leaving when nurses made me shower and change before coming right back. She'd read statements from nurses describing how gentle I was with Lyra, how I'd learned her physical therapy exercises, how I sat through those first awful nights of nightmares and held her hand until she felt safe enough to sleep again. She'd read the social worker's notes about how Lyra lit up when I walked into a room, how she talked more, smiled more, relaxed more. She'd seen my background check, too, the old charges, the stupid mistakes, but also the last decade of my life. Stable work, paying taxes, no trouble with the law, not even a speeding ticket. She saw the whole picture, and she saw the truth I already knew. I wasn't perfect, but I was hers, and I wasn't going anywhere. Judge Reyes had read everything, every report, every evaluation, but what really hit her were the letters. All 37 of them. Letters from my brothers in the club, from neighbors who'd watched me for years and never saw me be anything but steady. From my construction foreman, who'd kept me on his crew for 8 years and wrote that I was the most reliable guy he had. From the owner of the Rusty Spoon, who'd known me a decade. Even from Marie, the waitress who'd watched me in that diner, who wrote 2 full pages about how a rough, scarred man treated a broken little girl with more tenderness than most dads ever managed. She understood something most people don't. Family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes family is the one who steps in when everyone else steps back. The one who stays. The one who sees you at your lowest and doesn't turn away. The one whose promises mean something. Judge Reyes lifted her gavel, but didn't strike it yet. Instead, she looked directly at me, really looked, and spoke to me for the first time that day. "Mr. Mackenzie," she said, "do you understand what you're taking on?" "Yes, ma'am," I answered, my voice rougher than usual. "This child will need medical care, ongoing therapy, support for her disability, patience when trauma resurfaces, advocacy at school, stability, permanence. This is not temporary, Mr. Mackenzie. This is not until it gets difficult. This is forever." "I know, ma'am," I said quietly. "And you're prepared for that? You want that?" I looked down at Lyra, this tiny kid whose hand was clenched around mine like it was the last solid thing in her world. "Yeah," I said, barely above a whisper. "I want that." The judge smiled, a real one this time. A warm, genuine smile that softened her whole face. "Then that's exactly what's going to happen," she said. 6 months later. Lyra was standing in the driveway of my place. Our place now, on a Sunday afternoon in early autumn. The air had just started to cool, and the leaves were beginning to fade from green into gold. My house wasn't much. A single-story place sitting on 3 acres at the end of a gravel road. Quiet, private, the kind of spot where neighbors minded their own business. The siding could use a new coat of paint. The roof had more patchwork than I liked to admit. But the garage? That was my kingdom. Bigger than the house itself, filled with motorcycles in every stage of repair, tools hung neatly on the walls, and that familiar mix of oil and metal that Lyra now said smelled like home. And the porch, God, that porch. I built a wraparound swing the second week she moved in, after I caught her sitting on the front steps staring at the trees. She didn't say she needed a place to just be, but I knew it. That swing became her spot, a quiet perch where the world wasn't demanding anything from her. She was still using crutches. The doctors had talked about prosthetics, fitted legs, specialized surgeries, months of physical therapy. We were working toward it slowly, one appointment at a time. For now, the crutches were enough. She'd grown stronger. She could move around the house without wearing herself out. She was even going to school, a new school where nobody knew her past unless she chose to tell them. The principal had made sure every staff member understood she wasn't to be pitted, but protected. Her health had come back piece by piece. Her cheeks weren't hollow anymore. Her arms weren't so thin you could count every bone. Her hair had been washed, trimmed, styled, thanks to one of the club's old ladies who worked at a salon. The woman cried through half the appointment because she couldn't stop thinking about everything Lyra had endured. Lyra's wardrobe finally fit. Some clothes came from shopping trips that nearly gave me a panic attack because I had no idea what I was doing. Some came from the club, hand-me-downs from their kids, wrapped up lovingly and passed along. And she smiled now, really smiled. The kind that lit up her whole face and reminded everyone who saw her that healing was not only possible, it was happening. The birthday party. The Hells Angels threw her a birthday party, not because it was her actual birthday. We'd missed that one in July while she was recovering, learning to trust again. They did it because Brick mentioned it during a meeting. And once the brothers heard the idea, there was no stopping it. They turned my whole property into something out of a childhood dream. Balloons tied to the fence posts, streamers hanging from trees, a giant banner across the yard that said Happy Birthday, Ray in letters so big you could read them from the gravel road. Tables loaded with food, burgers, hot dogs, potato salad, coleslaw, baked beans, chips, and the obligatory tray of veggies nobody wanted, but someone insisted on for balance. And the cake. Damn, that cake. 3 tall layers of purple frosting because she'd whispered once, almost shyly, that her favorite color was purple. The bakery went all out. Flowers, butterflies, her name written in fancy script. The presents piled up too. Some practical, clothes, school supplies. Some joyful, games, toys, books. A bike with training wheels that I'd modify for her, because one night she'd mentioned she used to love riding before everything went dark. Someone got her sketch pads and colored pencils because she'd been drawing in the margins of her homework, and the pictures were heartbreakingly beautiful. And everyone showed up. Not just the men who rode into that diner 6 months ago. The entire chapter came. Their wives, girlfriends, moms, sisters, women who brought food, tied balloons, decorated trees, and stood together watching her with tears in their eyes. Because this moment right here, was everything the club stood for. Loyalty, family, protection, second chances, and choosing love when the world had shown someone nothing but cruelty. Kids were tearing around my yard, children of brothers, nieces, nephews, laughing, yelling, chasing footballs at each other. That wild, joyful chaos you only get when adults hand out cake and step back to let kids be kids. Lyra watched them quietly at first. She stood near me with her crutches, almost unsure, like she'd forgotten what it felt like to just play, to be loud, to belong. Then Sophie, a girl her age whose dad also rode with us, walked right up and asked if she wanted to go see the new kittens in the barn. Before answering, Lyra glanced up at me. She still did that, checked for reassurance a dozen times a day, like she needed to confirm this world was real, like she was double-checking that wanting something wasn't going to get her punished. I smiled and nodded. Go ahead, kid. Have fun. She followed Sophie across the yard, and something in her posture loosened. almost like she was remembering how to be ate. When it was time for cake, everyone gathered around. And let me tell you, 30 bikers trying to sing happy birthday is a special kind of off-key miracle. But it was perfect. Lyra stood in front of that big purple cake, smiling so wide it could have powered the porch lights. When we told her to make a wish, she closed her eyes and really thought about it, long enough that people chuckled softly. Later, when someone asked what she wished for, she first said nothing. Then, with more honesty, I already got it. As the afternoon slid into evening, someone suggested giving her a proper Hell's Angels welcome. The brothers moved toward their bikes like a single organism. 30 engines fired up at once, maybe more. The sound rolled across the property like thunder peeling open the sky. It shook the dirt, rattled the windows, and probably annoyed the hell out of neighbors who were used to this by now. But the roar wasn't anger. It was joy, a celebration, a promise, a message that said, "You belong. You're one of us. And we make noise when our family grows." Lyra laughed. Not a shy little giggle, not even close. She let out a full body, uncontrollable, from the soul laugh that seemed to burst out of her chest like it had been trapped for years and finally found an exit. She laughed so hard her crutches slipped, her balance wobbled. And I was already there. One hand on her shoulder, the other under her elbow, steadying her before she toppled over. When she found her footing again and the laughter softened into breathless little giggles, I knelt to her level the same way I had in that diner the day everything changed. "You good, Kit?" She didn't answer. She just wrapped her arms around my neck, tight, and pressed her face against my shoulder. And she fit there, like she'd always been meant to. Over the noise of the bikes, the chatter of people, the music drifting from the porch speakers, I still heard her whisper, "I'm home." 2 words. Simple, soft, but heavy enough to change a life. 2 words that meant she felt safe. She belonged. The nightmare was behind her. And the future wasn't something to fear, just something to walk toward. It meant family wasn't the people who should love you. Family was the people who choose to. The ones who step up, who fight for you, who stay. And if this story hits you in the chest, even a little, then do something with that feeling. Share this video, because there are more kids like Lyra out there. Kids sitting in quiet houses, in quiet rooms, behind quiet doors, waiting for an adult to stop looking away. Maybe this story reaches a teacher who's noticed a student's bruises. Maybe it reaches a neighbor who's heard something unsettling through a wall but hasn't picked up the phone. Maybe it reaches someone who needs a reminder that one person can make a difference, that stepping up matters, that choosing to care is how the world changes. One child, one moment, one decision at a time. If you stand for protecting the innocent, type, "We see you," in the comments. Subscribe if you want more stories that prove this world still has good in it. And remember this. Sometimes the people society fears the most. The patched-up men on motorcycles. The ones strangers avoid. The ones judged by ink and leather. Sometimes they're the ones with the biggest hearts. Sometimes the scariest man in the room is the one who'll fight hardest for a child who can't fight for themselves. This was my story. And Lyra's. And trust me, it's far from over.